the President of the United States was that you had to be a natural-born U.S. citizen, must be at least 35 years of age, and must have been a permanent citizen of the United States for no less than 14 years. When it comes time for a presidential election, there is a voting process in which people announce that they are going to run for president, and then they go through the caucus primary system in all 50 states across the United States of America, where they narrow it down to one candidate per party, the Democratic and the Republican Party. I am proud to say that that process starts in my home state, Iowa, in the Iowa caucus. Iowa is one of the few states to have a caucus, while a majority of the states have a primary. And then when that is all done, then the actual election process begins. The votes are based on popular and electoral votes. Most elections were won by both popular and electoral votes, but there have only been 4 times where it was a split vote. And when a split vote occurs, the Electoral College is always right. So the president in that situation that wins by the electoral votes wins. And then the president places his left hand on the Bible and raises his or her right hand up and says, "I, Hannah Ackerman, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the duties of the office of President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." And then they say, "So help me God." The tradition of "So help me God" was debated whether or not that was started by George Washington. And, of course, things will happen to the president, whether they die or resign from office. And there is a succession process in which that occurs. If something were to happen to the president, then the vice president succeeds. And then the Speaker of the House succeeds the Vice President, the Senate Pro Tem succeeds the Speaker of the House, and then the cabinet orders in which they were established succeeds the Pro Tem. Now, let us learn some facts about the presidents. George Washington. Well, we know a lot about George Washington already. Of course, we all know he was the first president of the United States. He was nicknamed the father of his country because, well, he was the first president of the United States. He was the only unanimously elected president, and he was the only president that did not live in the White House, and the only president that did not have a political party, although some say that he was a Federalist. Although there was the legend that he had wooden teeth, he really didn't have wooden teeth, but he did have many sets of false teeth, and get this. His teeth were so bad, since they didn't really have dental insurance back then, that he had only one real tooth remaining when he got inaugurated. Hiya! And one myth about George Washington was that he chopped down his father's cherry tree. When his father confronted him, he said, "I cannot tell a lie." Ironically, that story is a lie. And he was the only president to have a state named after him, and that would be Washington State. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., also bears his name. He is featured on the $1 bill and the quarter. When he finished his second term, he was offered to serve a third term, but he turned down the offer, saying that it was unhealthy for a president to go so long, and so he started the non-constitutional requirement of serving only 2 terms. John Adams. John Adams was the vice president of George Washington before he became the president. He was nicknamed the father of American independence and encouraged colonists to seek independence from Britain. He and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin helped construct the Declaration of Independence. John Adams lived to be 90, which was unusual for people like him, because people back then didn't live that long. And he was the first president to die on the 4th of July. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was the father of the Declaration of Independence, and he wrote most of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was mainly a list of grievances to the King of England. And of course, when that document was signed, we won our independence from England, and thus winning the Revolutionary War years later. He is featured on the $2 bill and the nickel. James Madison. James Madison was the father of the Constitution. He and Thomas Jefferson were part of the Democratic Republican Party. James Madison was the shortest president at being only 5 feet and 4 inches, and he only weighed 100 pounds. He was the first president to wear lawn pants. Presidents before him wore knickers, which were pants that came up to your knee. James Madison was president during the War of 1812 and was the last president to serve in the first White House before it was burned down by the British. James Monroe. James Monroe was nicknamed the Era of Good Feelings President because that was the time when we won the War of 1812, where Britain tried to take back our country. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was the first president to be son of a preceding president, John Adams. He was the last president of the Democratic Republican Party before it split in two. John Quincy Adams was the first president to lose re-election. He lost to Andrew Jackson. And then when he was done president, he served 17 years in Congress until his death age at the age of 80. He was also the first president to have his photo taken. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was nicknamed Old Hickory because of how he was during the War of 1812 and how his troops perceived him. He was as tough as an old hickory tree. And the term hickory is explainable of what Jackson was like. Tough, but flexible. They used to make baseball bats out of hickory, but now since that they're made of pine, they shatter like glass. Ironically, pine is wood. Jackson was the first Democratic president, and the Democratic Party is also known as the Party of Jackson. He was the first president to be a prisoner of war, and so far is the only president to be a POW. When he refused to polish an officer's boots, the officer scarred him, which he carried for the rest of his life on his cheek. He is featured on the $20 bill. Martin Van Buren. Van Buren was the first American citizen president. Presidents before him were British subjects. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was excited when he got elected president that he wrote down the longest inaugurational speech ever of 8,445 words. And he spoke for 1 hour and 40 minutes out on a cold March day. And he refused to wear a coat or a hat because he wanted to look distinguished and look like the president. That was not smart of him, however, because he fell ill like about an hour after he did his inaugurational speech. He caught a cold, and of course when you lower your temperature, your body becomes prone to any pathogen that comes along. And while he was still recovering, it took a turn for the worse. He caught pneumonia and died exactly 1 month after he became president. So, in the end, Harrison spoke the longest, but served the shortest. He was succeeded by his vice president, John Tyler. John Tyler was the first president to succeed a president. His nickname was His Excellency, People often refer to him as Acting President Tyler, and he would refuse to open mail that read Acting President Tyler, because that was sort of an insult to him. He also had the most children than any other president so far. He's had 15 children from 2 different wives. His first wife died while he was in office, and the second one he married while in office. After he finished his term, people no longer called presidents that succeeded presidents acting president. James Knox Polk. James Knox Polk was nicknamed Young Hickory because, like Jackson, he was from South Carolina and, well, basically Old Hickory was taken. Zachary Taylor. Taylor was nicknamed Rough and Ready because he often wore farm clothes and a straw hat while farming, and that relaxed style earned him the nickname Rough and Ready. On the 4th of July, he had a party where he served cherries and milk on a hot summer's day. And then he later complained of stomach pains, which later turned into cholera. And people believed he was poisoned by the bacteria in it. And he was succeeded by his vice president, Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore was nicknamed the last of the Whigs because he was the last of that party. Unlike his president, he was tall and refined, and while Taylor was short and had a relaxed style. While Fillmore refused to run again, they nominated a Whig president, but that failed and then the party collapsed. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce is the great-great-great-great-uncle of George Walker Bush, the preceding president to our current president, Barack Obama. James Buchanan. While Buchanan was finishing up his term, the southern states seceded the Union, or left the Union, and formed their own country, the Confederate States of America, or the CSA, and went against the Union, the United States of America, the USA. One cool thing about Buchanan was that in one eye he was nearsighted and in the other he was farsighted, and he often had to tilt his head to figure out which eye to use. It's a bit of an annoyance, but the thing is, that kind of thing is not uncommon. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president, and he was nicknamed Honest Abe because of how he studied law. He was born in a log cabin in Kentucky, and he supported the Union and wrote the Gettysburg Address, which encouraged the Union soldiers to keep fighting against the Confederate. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth a whole new nation. And of course, as you know, a score is 20 years. So take 20 years times 4 and add 7, and that includes 87. Back in that day, that was 87 years. Now it's basically ancient. Lincoln was the first president to grow a beard. He grew it at a suggestion when an 11-year-old wrote a letter to him about it. And he was the first president to be assassinated. He was shot by Shakespeare actor John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater during a production of the comedy My American Cousin. He was succeeded by his vice president, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat from the South, and he often argued with politicians about the Union and the Confederacy. He was nicknamed the veto president because, oh, was he stubborn, bullishly stubborn. And he often vetoed bills that were not his idea. He was the first president to be impeached. He was saved by 1 vote and continued his term. Ulysses S Grant.